One of the first videos I made for this channel was how to play Wixoss. With newer trading card game overviews, I'll cover how to play, but I'll also try and review the strengths, weaknesses, and unique points in the game's rule design. I covered Wixoss before I had really settled into this rhythm, so it never had a review segment, and I've started to notice that while there's now a decent variety of videos about how to play Wixoss, some of them admittedly better than my own, it's a little bit harder to find videos about why to play Wixoss. Why would you play Wixoss over any of the other trading card games on the market? And there are a lot on the market right now. It's no secret that Wixoss is still one of my favorite trading card games, and it has been for over a decade at this point. But what does Wixoss specifically do well to make it such a good game? While I do hope that this video might convince some viewers out there to give Wixoss a try, I think digging into what makes a great trading card game is also an important question in a much more general sense as well, both for those who play trading card games, and even more importantly for those who design trading card games. The first reason that Wixoss is so great is waifus. Moving on, the second reason is consistency. Wixoss uses a 40-card deck with a 4 of maximum for individual cards. As I discussed in my earlier deck size video, this is on the extreme end of consistency for a trading card game. The average in most games is much closer to the equivalent of a 3 of limit if you're looking at a 40-card deck. On top of this, in Wixoss, you also have an unshuffled extra deck which contain all of your most powerful effects, including early resource generation and card selection, all of your instant speed interaction, as well as powerful damage and long-term advantage engines. If this wasn't enough, the game also has plenty of low-cost card draw and card selection, with options to pull cards both from your deck or your trash. To top it all off, the mulligan in Wixoss is extremely generous. Like all card games, there is of course the risk of drawing late cards early and early cards late, but compared to other trading card games, the mulligan and extra deck consistency tools minimize this variation significantly. Consistency in trading card games can be a bit of a double-edged sword, as it can make some matchups boring if you know every card is going to be played out in the same order. To some extent, this is an issue in Yu-Gi-Oh!, as often your turn 1 board is going to cycle through very similar loops every game that will still take a bunch of time to walk through. But, like in Yu-Gi-Oh!, different decks with different interaction all force you to change up your game plan on the fly. More importantly, consistency also makes players feel far more in control of their game plan. If you lose in a high randomness game, chances are you just got unlucky and the outcome might be the same even if you took different actions. Meanwhile, in low randomness games, whether you win or lose can likely be traced back to a decision you made at some point during the game. While this can emphasize a skill gap between experienced players and newer players, it also makes it much more rewarding to grow and develop your skills in the game, and it also gives you far more ownership over the result. It is worth mentioning life bursts as one of the few noteworthy points of randomness in Wixoss relative to other games. In Diva format, which is all that's available in English, life bursts are very strong, often not only stopping a point or two of damage, but also often opening up a lane for you to counterattack back through. When you only have 7 life and 2 instant speed effects to stop opposing attacks, every point of damage matters, and either flipping more or fewer life bursts than the average of 3.5 per game can significantly impact the result. In the earlier classic format and key formats of Wixoss, life bursts were much weaker, with much more limited removal and most bursts just drawing you a card. It still made a difference to the outcome, but not nearly as much. I do still miss these weaker life bursts and more strong advantage engines of the earlier eras of the game, but even with Diva format leaning into stronger and more swingy life bursts, Wixoss is still one of the most consistent trading card games in print. Wixoss has a fantastic sense of pacing, and in many ways this is only improved with the Diva format. As mentioned above, you have a consistent extra deck full of powerful effects, but while in Yu-Gi-Oh! This often leads to an explosive sequence of cards from the extra deck on turn 1, in Wixoss you gradually gain access to these cards as you build resources and level up. Wixoss's level system allows gameplay to ramp up over several turns. Your first turns are going to be mostly spent building resources and chipping in for small amounts of damage, while your strongest abilities and Signy only become accessible at level 3. This isn't completely unique to Wixoss, as Wixoss, Cardfight Vanguard, and plenty of other games use very similar level systems, but Wixoss is the only game that I know of that combines this level system with a powerful extra deck as well. Further regulating the pace of the game is the clever implementation of the life system and field limit. Players have 7 life cards, which have to be cleared before a player can launch the final attack to end the game. Players have a field limit of 3 Signy as well as their center Larig. This means that the maximum theoretical damage per turn is 4, which is extremely rare. You need to be able to clear the opponent's entire field in order to allow all of your Signy to get in for damage, and you need your opponent to not have any guard cards in their hand to let your Larig attack get in for damage. Even then, if you do threaten the full 4 damage, the opponent has the chance to defend themselves with their extra deck interaction. Practically, this makes first turn kills basically impossible in Wixoss, and even the most powerful all-in aggro decks are generally going to try and close out the game on turn 4, turn 3 at the absolute earliest. However, 7 life is still not a whole lot, and between the plentiful removal to push damage, as well as steady attacks from your center Larig, games rarely go very long either. Even control decks are rarely going to go much longer than 6 or 7 turns. I also appreciate that Wixoss's decks are consistent enough that multiple games per match aren't required to help account for variance and bad luck. In terms of gameplay, while go fast aggro and heavy control decks both exist in Wixoss, most games play out much closer to what Magic players would recognize as tempo, where both players try and push damage and disrupt the opponent while budgeting their resources to ensure that they can play the game out to the end. This means that often the winner is determined by who is exactly 1 turn faster. It is very common in Wixoss that the loser would have won if they survived for just 1 more turn. Beyond even that, I've had plenty of games where the winner was determined by a single resource. While I'm sure there are some players who enjoy overwhelming victories, personally, I find the razor-sharp margins of victory in Wixoss to be one of its strongest features. It keeps a ton of tension and uncertainty in the result right up until the final attack, and it also helps make sure that every decision taken during the game matters to the end result. That one resource you denied by returning an opposing Signy to hand instead of vanishing it may be the difference between your opponent being able to stop 3 damage and winning, or only being able to stop 2 damage and losing. On the other hand, if your opponent is able to survive and reuse that bounced card, you may have given them just enough damage on their side to push through your defenses for a win. Although this is a little bit harder to define than pacing and consistency, I do also want to mention the mechanical elegance of Wixoss's rules and mechanics as well. Cards are regularly in transit along a zone progression, from deck to hand to field to enter resources. You draw 2 cards per turn, which means that your hand is constantly being refreshed. If your opponent doesn't clear your field using the game's plentiful removal, you'll often do it yourself to make room for more powerful options as you climb up the level curve. And since there's no summon limitations other than the field limit, you can easily replace most or all of your field each turn. As your life is damaged or your Signy are vanished from the field, they move to your enter zone, giving you more resources to use either for defense or for a counterattack on your next turn. This regular movement of cards means that each turn is dramatically different from the turn before it, and every turn has multiple important decision points to make regarding sequencing and resource allocation. However, because of the small field limit of only 3 Signy, the board is never overly complex. There's also a ton of interaction across the game due to the direct intersection of the 3 Signy lanes, the plentiful resource disruption, and of course the vital but limited combat phase interaction. All of this interaction is done with a far more streamlined priority system, with far less priority pauses than Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh!, which allow responses after every game action. Overall, the result is a system with a high degree of player decision-making and interaction, with minimized field complexity and priority pauses. The elegance and good gameplay of this system also holds true whether you're just using a simple starter deck, or you're using the most complex, fully tuned competitive list. Overall, consistency, pacing, and mechanical elegance are the main points that make Wixoss such a brilliant trading card game. The waifus certainly don't hurt either. This is admittedly a pretty subjective list, so it also acts as something of a guide as to what I personally find appealing in TCGs in general. While I do think a lot of this is pretty basic stuff that all players are going to appreciate at some level, undoubtedly other types of players are going to have slightly different criteria in what they're looking for in their games. For example, Wixoss is a fantastic game from a mechanical perspective, but the tight technical gameplay doesn't really leave a ton of room for role-playing. So if the roleplay and narrative of gameplay is something that's important to you, Wixoss might not be the best fit. If the existence of male characters is something that you'd like your game to acknowledge, Wixoss might also not be the best fit. I'm interested in hearing what points you have on your list of what makes a great trading card game, and if there's any points about Wixoss I might have missed here. If this video has convinced you to give Wixoss a shot, I can heartily recommend Tamanon for a 5-minute rundown of the rules to get you started playing quickly, and then the Life Burst podcast also has some great discussions about the current meta and deck lists. If you just want to see how the game plays, there's a few different channels uploading gameplay videos. Whatever your favorite game is, I hope you're able to continue enjoying all of the points that make it stand out. Have a fantastic day.